This is Politics and Media 101. I'm Jeff Browning. Michael Oren is the former ambassador of Israel to the United States, but his history and background are much deeper than that. He's been personally involved in every peace plan between Israelis and Palestinians for almost 20 years. Before that, he was a member of the Israeli military as a paratrooper in the 1982 Lebanon War. He served as ambassador during President Obama's first term in a time when the Iran nuclear deal was being negotiated and considered by Congress, creating very complicated diplomatic challenges for Israel and the United States. We spoke with him on January 23rd of this year, so this conversation was recorded well before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, when it was still very unclear what would happen there. As a reminder, like all of our conversations, this is an edited version of a much longer discussion that was taped live with audience questions. For information on how to join us and past episodes, please visit our website, pm101.live. Please also take a second to subscribe on whichever streaming service you're using right now so you don't miss our next episode on Monday, featuring Congresswoman Sylvia Garcia from Texas, who's a former judge and who served as one of the impeachment managers during President Trump's first impeachment, when he withheld aid from Ukraine in an attempt to pressure the Ukrainians to interfere in the U.S. election and help him stay president. Our co-founders Justin Higgins and John Gunnison led the interview. Without any further ado, let's roll the tape.
Here in the United States, we are experiencing almost an identity crisis with culture wars and not really a strong, united vision of what it means to be America. I was wondering if you could very briefly describe the impact that the persecution of the Jewish people for thousands of years has had on how the state of Israel approaches not only foreign affairs, but the ever important national security question.
It's so funny. I was just talking yesterday about my father. My father passed away this year, close to 96 years old, and he landed on Normandy Beach. And I was mentioning to somebody that in his landing craft, as it approached Normandy, there were mechanics from Massachusetts and farmers from Oklahoma, and Harvard graduates and, people from all around the United States, different classes, different walks of life. But everybody in that landing craft had a pretty good sense of what they were fighting for. They knew what America was. They knew what America stood for. They had a shared sense of values, and they knew that those values had to be defended. You scoot ahead 75 years, and you're hard-pressed to put that sort of eclectic group of Americans together in any closed environment and have them agree on what it means to be American. And that's a very difficult situation because you're up against other countries, such as China and Russia, where people do have a sense of shared values, and they do have a sense of what they're fighting for. And that gives them a tremendous advantage. Enemies in the Middle East, too, have a sense of shared values. We may not like those values, and they're willing to die for those values. Make no mistake about it. For Israel, our identity is highly, highly complex. It is, yes, there is a sense of 2,000 years at least of suffering, of exile, of inquisitions, culminating in the greatest mass massacre in human history, the Holocaust. And that weighs very heavily on our decision-making. We'll talk about Iran shortly, I'm sure, but any discussion with Iran from an Israeli perspective has to begin with an understanding of what it means to be an Israeli Jew and to hear the leaders of an enemy country say that they're sworn to destroy you and to throw you into the sea. And nobody in the United States anywhere can tell you to dismiss that lightly, because we know that when enemies threaten genocide, hey, sometimes they mean them, and sometimes they're developing the means to carry out that genocide. So we have to take it very, very seriously.
And Ambassador, you just hit on a couple things. Let's start out with maybe the elephant in the room. Israel advocated against the JCPOA in the United States. What will the approach for Israel be if a new deal is reached in Vienna?
Well, it depends, of course, on the nature of the deal. My gut feeling tells me that a deal will be reached, that deal will probably be worse than this 2015 JCPOA. There may be some cosmetic changes. Israel cannot coexist with an Iran that has what's known as threshold capacity. That is the ability to make a bomb within a matter of weeks, even days. If Iran gets that capability, then Israel will be on constant alert. for the possibility that Iran will break out and create a nuclear weapon. Now, the JCPOA itself in 2015 basically accepted the fact that Iran would be a threshold nation. It enabled Iran to retain all of its nuclear infrastructure, its centrifuges. It enabled Iran to develop more advanced centrifuges that could enrich uranium at 2, 4, even 6 times the rate of 2015, which greatly reduced the breakout time. It did nothing to stop Iran from developing intercontinental ballistic missiles, and it did nothing about Iran's efforts to make a warhead that could actually deliver a bomb. And so Israel assumed in 2015 that the JCPOA paved Iran's path to being a nuclear power. Very much in contrast to what the American administration was saying, was that it blocked the path. But we couldn't see that at all. We still don't see that. And so one gets the sense here that while in the United States, American leaders, certainly the current party, can coexist with Iran, having a threshold capacity. President Biden has said innumerable times that the United States is committed to preventing Iran from getting a bomb, but he hasn't said that he's committed to preventing Iran from getting the capability to make a bomb. And in that is a major, I would say, a vast difference for the state of Israel. So the choice we'll have to make, should this deal be struck, would be, do we wait around a year or two till the deal expires, or should we act now? Should we act preemptively? And this is going to be one of the weightiest decisions that any Israeli leaders have taken over the course of our history. And I quite literally lose sleep over it.
So our former guest here, Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta, said that any type of military conflict with Iran would set the program back roughly 3 years and not eliminate capacity to create a weapon. So if there was some type of preemptive invasion that you just referenced, what would the ultimate goal be if it won't prevent Iran from ever attaining a nuclear weapon?
But I have great respect for former Secretary of Defense Panetta, good friend. And I can't say that he's entirely wrong. We don't know. Empirically, Justin, there have been 2 military nuclear programs in the Middle East that have been eliminated through military action. Iraq in 1981 and Syria in 2007, both by Israel. Both those operations were preceded by prognostications of disaster, that the programs would go underground, that it would actually spur both the Iraqis and the Syrians to move ahead more quickly in developing nuclear weapons. And in all cases, all those prophecies proved wrong. Neither Iraq nor Syria today has a military nuclear program. But I'll say this about what Secretary Panetta said. If we could delay the program 3 years, that's a very long time in the Middle East. A very long time. And during that time, should Iran rebuild this program, Israel could act again. At the end of the day, our margin for error is exactly zero. Exactly zero. And it ties into what we said earlier about being a state that has this legacy of genocide behind us. Iranian leaders barely miss an opportunity to come out and reiterate their commitment to destroying my state. That is a genocidal pledge to kill 10 million people. And not just, by the way, Jews, but Palestinian Arabs as well, because they're Sunnis, and the Shiite leadership of Iran, I don't think, particularly cares about Sunni lives, probably even less than it cares about Jewish lives. And Israel has to take that seriously. We, as the Jewish state, have to act.
So if there is a kinetic involvement, would Israel be willing to go at it alone without the United States? And what would that type of dynamic, where it's Israel going after Iran and their nuclear sites, look like?
Well, it's not a matter of choice so much. I think it's almost a matter of, we'll have no choice, alone or not alone. I would assume that we would have to go alone. And if we do go, and the United States doesn't want to be dragged down to any further imbroglios in the Middle East, that is clear. The American people don't want it. And it depends on the nature of the Iranian response. Hezbollah, which takes its orders pretty much from Tehran, has between 130 and 150,000 rockets and missiles. They are deeply embedded under 200 villages in southern Lebanon. It's a major challenge for the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, to go into those villages. It's training to go into those villages, house. Back in the Second Lebanon War in 2006, Israel was hit with between 200 and 300 rockets a day. The IDF estimate for the next war would be for between 2,000 and 4,000 rockets a day, which is completely intolerable for the society. And it wouldn't just come from Lebanon. It could come from Hamas in Gaza. They also get their rockets from Tehran. It could come from Shiite militias in Iraq. It could come from as far away as Yemen, where the Houthi proxies have taken over and have missile capabilities that could reach the state of Israel. They've used them against the Saudis and most recently against the UAE.
This is Silicon Wadi, a cluster of cities in Israel with one of the highest concentrations of tech companies and startups on Earth. It's home to Waze, Wix, SodaStream, and Fiverr, files more patents per capita than all but 4 countries, and is ranked the 4th most startup-friendly nation overall, behind only Canada, the UK, and the US. The difference is, those countries aren't next door to the Syrian civil war. 30 members of the UN still don't recognize the existence of Israel, including most of its neighbors. In fact, any evidence of traveling there on any passport prevents you from visiting 8 of those countries. But despite all of this, despite the constant threat of terrorism, despite being only slightly bigger than Fiji, Israel creates some of the most successful tech companies and entrepreneurs in the world.
We've been talking about diplomacy, we've been talking about war, but there's also the middle ground of deterrence. And it sounds like, Ambassador, that the goals of all of these actions are to buy time, from breakout, from nuclear weapons, so on and so forth. Negotiations, war. Also, cyber attacks could be a form of deterrence. Do you think that that is a viable option, and might that be a more preferred path to an actual kinetic war?
A possibility, and I don't know the full extent of our cyber capabilities, but I know that Israel is a world leader in cyber capabilities. We're 0.02% of the world population, but we attract 20% of the world's investment in cyber capabilities, so we're punching about 200 times above our weight. But I want to go back to your initial statement, which I found very compelling, Justin, which is that Israel's just trying to buy time. It reminds me of a conversation I had once with Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor of The Atlantic, a good friend. And it was following one of our small-scale battles with Hamas in Gaza. And he says, I get what the tactics are, but I don't get what the strategy is. What's Israel's long-term strategy? And my reply to Jeff was that Israel's tactics are its strategy. What does that mean? Ever since 1948, we periodically have had to fight a war. It usually comes out every 4 or 5 years we fight a war, sometimes bigger, sometimes smaller. These wars have the effect of convincing some of our adversaries at various times that it's not worthwhile for them to conduct war against us. That's what happened with the Jordanians, with the Egyptians, more recently with the signatories to the Abraham Accords. Not everybody. But in between these wars, Israel flourishes. We build a flagrantly democratic society. It's one of the 4 or 5 countries in the world that has never known a second of non-democratic governance. We build the most innovative nation in the world. We build a country that has an army that's more than twice as large as the British and French armies today, with the art, with the literature, all the while absorbing sometimes hundreds of thousands of immigrants from foreign countries. We do that. We do that by buying time. And that tactic has been our strategy since 1948. And unfortunately, it's not over yet.
So, Ambassador, what would it take to establish formal ties with Saudi Arabia?
I think it would take a lot. Saudi Arabia is fundamentally different than the other signatories to the Abraham Accords. That's Bahrain, UAE, Morocco, and Sudan. Insofar as the Saudis are the custodians of the 2 holiest cities in Islam, Mecca and Medina. Their legitimacy of their dynasty is deeply embedded in conservative Islam, and I think that affects a type of constraint on them that some of these other countries do not have. Having said that, I think Israel is developing relations with Saudi Arabia on all different levels. I've now heard about Israelis who have gone to Saudi Arabia for conferences, to do business, and the appearance of Saudi and Israeli interactions on multiple levels is no longer such a novelty. as ambassador. I used to get on the elevator with the Saudi ambassador, and he would look right through me like I was made of glass. He's now the foreign minister. He's a great guy, I'm sure, but that wouldn't happen today. I think that the Saudis are going to wait to see what happens with the Kuwaitis, what happens with the Omanis, um, and to get a general sense of how these Abraham Accords are playing out. Right now, it's a very dicey situation insofar as both the Saudis and the Emiratis are also opening up channels of discussion with the Iranians because they feel that the United States has abandoned them, and that they are trying to hedge their bets a little bit. They feel that Iran may just come out of this on top.
Maybe an outstanding issue with Saudi Arabia, but also the Arab world in general, most of the Arab world, is the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. Why has there been so little progress in recent years? As the more powerful country and party, can't Israel do more in this process, which would in turn enhance Israel's diplomatic prospects with Saudi Arabia and other countries in the region?
Well, let me put my cards on the table. I'm a rather unique position. I don't call it if it's an enviable position, but a unique one of having been involved in every peace plan going back to the Ur plan of Oslo in 1993. I was an advisor to the government of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, involved in all the peace plans. I took part in the last negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians. This is now, what is this, about 11 or 12 years ago. I was a consultant for the Trump peace plan as well. I was called to the White House to give my views on the peace plan. So I've been involved all the way. And then for about a year and a half when I was in government, I was the deputy minister to the prime minister. I was in charge of the Palestinian issue, both on the West Bank and we call it Judea and Samaria and Gaza, in trying to make some type of progress. Frankly, I made none, zero. And the reasons I made none, I came to conclude, was the same reason that we had failed to make significant progress over the previous 30 years. Let's start with the Israeli side. Today, you have a generation of Israelis, a young generation. By the way, we have the largest per capita population of any industrialized country under the age of 30. We have by far the largest natural growth rate of any industrialized country. The United States has had a negative growth rate for the last few years, as have most Western countries. Israel's youth population has grown immensely. That population does not remember the Oslo peace agreement, doesn't remember the Jordanian-Israel peace agreement. It just remembers that Israel pulled out of Lebanon and got thousands of rockets. Israel pulled out of Gaza and got thousands of rockets. So you can't convince that young generation that if you give up territory, you're going to get peace. And they have absolutely zero faith in the Palestinian leadership. And in that, they have a lot in common with the Palestinians, who also have zero faith in the Palestinian leadership to actually be able to make a peace agreement and keep the treaty. The Israelis fear, and I think quite rightly, that were a Palestinian state to be created in the West Bank, it would quickly fall to the terrorists, to Hamas if we're lucky, ISIS if we're not so lucky, Al-Qaeda, and that we would once again be pelted with rockets in the center of our country, not on the periphery. And I think it's a very real and justified fear. So that's on the Israeli side. On the Palestinian side, it gets much, much, much more complicated. The Palestinians hold the record of a people who has been most frequently offered a two-state solution and have turned it down, usually with violence. That was in 1937 when the British offered a two-state solution, 1947 when the UN offered a two-state solution, 2000 and 2001 when President Clinton offered a two-state solution, 2008 when President Bush offered a two-state solution. For 8 years of the presidency of Barack Obama, the most pro-Palestinian president in history, Palestinians sat on the side. They would not even come to the negotiating table. They would not. I saw them walk away. And people made a big deal about how the Palestinians rejected the Trump peace plan. Hey, they rejected every peace plan going back about 80 years. There's nothing new about that. And it begs the question whether the Palestinians actually want that state. And some interesting people on the extreme Israeli left, like A.B. Oshu, a great novelist, have concluded that they just simply don't. They want a one state. And they basically don't want us here. I spent, entirely too many years studying the Middle East. I have a PhD in Middle Eastern history, a few other degrees on Middle Eastern history. But I don't think I learned as much in all those years of university study as I did in a matter of minutes in my last negotiations with the Palestinians. The chief Palestinian negotiator turned to me and said, "You want us to recognize you as the Jewish people endowed with the right of self-determination in your homeland. But what you're asking us to do is give up our identity. And suddenly something hit me, the light bulb went off, which is, all this talk about negotiating about borders and extent of sovereignty and security, that's sort of missing the point. The point is that this is about identity. And that made a profound, profound impact on me, that remark. And it made me understand just how deep this conflict goes and how intractable it will be. That doesn't mean we can't make progress. And I have been working on progress, I think, for not years, but for decades. And I think that we can make progress as long as our goals are real and real for the Middle East. What is extraordinary to me is that after nearly 30 years of the Oslo peace process, there has been almost no new thinking, almost zero new thinking, even though the process has failed again and again and again and again.
Yes, this is a very grave situation as an onlooker from the outside, just looking in. So, Ambassador, I have to ask you, Israel has close ties with both the U.S. and Russia. We hear that war is ever becoming more and more likely from the experts we've spoken to on this show. The U.S. is beginning to evacuate personnel out of Ukraine. So how will Israel be impacted if there is an invasion and there are more fraying of relations between Moscow and the United States?
It's a thorny situation for Israel. Israel will do nothing. Israel will do nothing because we don't have a horse in this race. But beyond that, Israel has close workable ties with Russia, both on the military and strategic level and on the cultural and personal level. And I'll explain. We too have a Russian army on our border, on the northern border with Syria. Our forces have to act almost nightly against Iranian attempts to install Iranian military bases in Syria. We bomb them. And we do this with the cooperation of the Russians, who are there, and they're there with very advanced anti-aircraft systems. We are direct communication with the Russian military. And so far, over the course of a decade, we have managed not to actually clash with them. And we don't intend to clash with them in the future. So that's a very important interest for us. The second interest is cultural. 1 out of every 7 Israelis speak Russian. I regularly appear on Russian media, on Russian television, on Russian radio. It's a vibrant country, vibrant part of our society. 1.5 million young people are second-generation Israelis who speak Russian. You can hear them on the street. And they may not be particularly enamored of Mr. Putin, but they certainly understand a Russia that feels that it's been threatened by the expansion of NATO up to its borders. And I think there's a growing realization that, the Russians, while far from being angelic, I do have a case here. And the United States didn't like it. When I was a kid, when the Russians put missiles in Cuba, the Russians don't like it when the United States puts missiles in the Ukraine, or plans to. So it's a thorny issue for Israel. Israel, at the ultimate, will sit this one out.
I got to ask you, you put a great emphasis with great pride about democracy in Israel. Can you condemn a Russian invasion into a sovereign democratic nation in Ukraine?
You can condemn it. The question is, what are you going to do beyond that? And then condemnations can come in all sorts of forms and intensities. I think the biggest detriment to Israel's national security from this will be to showcase once again America's inability to project power around the world. And this is what we've seen in this week's sometimes unfortunate presidential press conferences.
Do you condemn any future invasion of Russia into Ukraine?
Of course. So I'm a private citizen. I do. Sure I do.
Awesome.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that I don't think that the Russians have reason for some type of bitterness and excuse. I remember sitting with the Russian ambassador in 2011-12 in Washington, a very fine diplomat, who was telling me something that I didn't know, how insulted the Russians were that the United States, they claimed, lied to them over the incursion into Libya, the effort to take down Muammar Gaddafi. That the Russians claimed that they had been assured that the United States would not invade Libya together with other Western countries, and they felt betrayed. And I think what you're looking at with the Russians is a long history of bitterness and betrayal. And you got to take that in consideration as well. That does not mean, I want to stress, that mean that the Russians are justified in invading the Ukraine.
When it comes to Israel and China, these are strange bedfellows. In sheer size and geopolitical orientation, these two states appear vastly different. China is attracted to Israel's blazing technology sector, and Israel welcomes China's investments and potential as a research collaborator.
With new technology, we can make people live longer, personalize their medicine, prevent a lot of the diseases that are available. All of that is happening in exciting ways in Israel, and we're very excited about trying to bring this technology to China.
Chinese industry has become critical to the future of the Israeli state.
The U.S. is famously pivoting to the Asia-Pacific. The Biden administration behind scenes, according to reports from Axios and other outlets, is pressuring Israel to pick sides between the United States and China and to curtail these type of investments. Would it be in Israel's interest to curtail investments and cozy up with the United States, which is an ally?
It's not new. I just want to say this. I have sat through meetings of 3 administrations where the same message was given to us. It's either us or the Chinese. If the Chinese build the northern port of Haifa, then the U.S. Sixth Fleet will not visit will not visit Haifa. And they used to have a port of call there. Chinese are also building our southern port in Ashdod, and they are building the Tel Aviv subway system across from the street from where I'm talking to you. If you look across the skyline of Tel Aviv, we say the crane is our national bird. So many of those cranes have Chinese signs on them. Our parks in the morning are filled with Chinese workers bicycling to work. And my first job as deputy minister in charge of diplomacy was to go to the Chinese and ask for 20,000 more workers because we didn't have enough workers. And this, again, as with the Russian situation, puts us in a very thorny dilemma. Because on one hand, we need the Chinese. This is a rapidly expanding society. Just the ports, for example. Our ports were built by the British in the 1930s for a country that had basically 1 million inhabitants. Now we have 10 million inhabitants, and those same ports have to bring in food. Most of our food is imported from Europe and beyond. It simply didn't have the capacity to do it. It's actually a strategic danger. The Chinese could build these ports quickly, cheaply. The United States does not have that capacity in any way to send 20,000 workers here to build our ports that could do it quickly and cheaply. And the same thing's true of the Tel Aviv subway system because our roads are completely chocked. We have 4 times the traffic density of the United States of America, and we lose tens of billions of dollars a year to lost work hours because of it.
Thank you very much for that clarification. The U.S. is famously pivoting to the Asia-Pacific. We touched on it a little bit earlier, and we are taking the competition with China more seriously, whether it's the far left, Bernie Sanders, far right, Donald Trump, or in the middle here, the Biden administration, whose actions, if you get into them, are the strongest of any U.S. administration in recent history, the Trump administration included. But China has a lot of investments in Israel, like the investments at a port in Haifa, which caused a rift actually between Trump and Mr. Bibi Netanyahu. The Biden administration behind scenes, according to reports from Axios and other outlets, is pressuring Israel to pick sides between the United States and China and to curtail these type of investments. Would it be in Israel's interest to curtail investments and cozy up with the United States, which is an ally?
It's not new. I just want to say this. I have sat through meetings of 3 administrations where the same message was given to us. It's either us or the Chinese. If the Chinese build the northern port of Haifa, then the U.S. Sixth Fleet will not visit will not visit Haifa. And they used to have a port of call there. Chinese are also building our southern port in Ashdod, and they are building the Tel Aviv subway system across from the street from where I'm talking to you. If you look across the skyline of Tel Aviv, we say the crane is our national bird. So many of those cranes have Chinese signs on them. Our parks in the morning are filled with Chinese workers bicycling to work. And my first job as deputy minister in charge of diplomacy was to go to the Chinese and ask for 20,000 more workers because we didn't have enough workers. And this, again, as with the Russian situation, puts us in a very thorny dilemma. Because on one hand, we need the Chinese. This is a rapidly expanding society. Just the ports, for example. Our ports were built by the British in the 1930s for a country that had basically 1 million inhabitants. Now we have 10 million inhabitants, and those same ports have to bring in food. Most of our food is imported from Europe and beyond. It simply didn't have the capacity to do it. It's actually a strategic danger. The Chinese could build these ports quickly, cheaply. The United States does not have that capacity in any way to send 20,000 workers here to build our ports that could do it quickly and cheaply. And the same thing's true of the Tel Aviv subway system, because our roads are completely chocked. We have 4 times the traffic density of the United States of America, and we lose tens of billions of dollars a year to lost work hours because of it. So these are not just economic necessities; they're strategic necessities for the state of Israel. But beyond that, we have to look what's happening globally. The United States is in retreat from Afghanistan, retreat from Syria. The Chinese are advancing very rapidly. They are the dominant power in Africa today. They have built the largest military base in Africa at the entrance of the Red Sea. They now control the entrance to the Red Sea. They're slated to build 2 more ports on the Persian Gulf. And if I'm a betting man, I'm going to wager that China will rebuild Syria after the Syrian civil war. The price tag for that is about $300 billion. The Russians can't do it. The Iranians can't do it. The United States can't do it. The Chinese can do it. They can do it quickly. And we're going to have China on our northern border as well. And that it puts Israel in a very, very difficult position. We want to be able to say to our American counterparts, and we did say in these meetings with the 3 administrations, always the same message, that we will take America's concerns into account all the time. At the end of the day, though, economic strategic interests will mandate that we have some type of relationship with the Chinese. It doesn't mean we're, quote unquote, getting into bed with them, but we aren't boycotting them either, nor can we afford to. At a time where the Chinese are just, they are coming to a neighborhood near us, in the Middle East or within Israel proper.
Thank you for that. And that was actually the line of the Israeli government in the Axios piece, the unnamed source who was quoted for the audience's edification.
It wasn't me.
Thank you very much. But for our questions, we will start with Brent. Brent, over to you.
So what really stood out to me in your remarks was kind of after going into a discussion about the JCPOA, you went into a discussion about, hey, a kinetic strike, it may buy you 3 years, and that's a long time in the Middle East. But the JCPOA capped uranium enrichment at 3.67% for 15 years. So it just seems like a little bit of a disconnect between a diplomatic and a military strike position, especially when Iran is sitting at 60% public announcement for uranium today. I mean, to me, what we miss is that this is essentially 1940s technology. The physics come from the 1920s. This isn't some huge leap that countries, have to make to get a bomb. You either are going to have to physically remove the capability to make a bomb or come to some sort of diplomatic solution. So my kind of question is, if the JCPOA fails, what comes next? Can Israel unify with the United States for some sort of option after the JCPOA fails? And then kind of the second part of my question is, did the Netanyahu administration make a mistake by kind of so overtly siding with one side of the political equation in the United States?
I guess the question is, did the Netanyahu administration make a mistake with so politicizing this issue and cozying up with Republicans during the Obama administration? Because we addressed everything else.
Well, then I think he made a point by noting that the JCPOA purportedly froze or put a cap on Iran's nuclear stockpile at 3.4% enrichment for 15 years. In fact, the JCPOA has what's called sunset clauses, which gradually lift the restrictions of the JCPOA beginning in the year 2023. That is next year. And 5 years after that, virtually all of those restrictions will be lifted. And Iran will be able to do everything it's doing now illegally, completely legally under the JCPOA, but will be able to do it 10 times over. And that's our estimate. And Iran will do it. And it not only will have that, it'll also have actually earned those hundreds of billions of dollars from the JCPOA, which, as I mentioned earlier, would not be spent on schools and hospitals, but on more missiles to deter us. The Iranians are developing the ability to enrich uranium on an industrial scale within a few years because of those more advanced centrifuges, which the JCPOA does not void, does not. So when the centrifuges go back online, they will enrich at 6 times the rate, which cuts down the breakout time. And we've seen how fast they've gone from 3.5% to 60%, right? In a matter, basically, of a few months, back a few weeks. Imagine what they can do if they really set their mind to it with advanced centrifuges. At the same time, the JCPOA does not say nothing about the ballistic missiles that carry the warheads, and they say nothing about the warheads themselves. The JCPOA is 154 pages long. It devotes 1/2 of one page to weaponization. And yet we know from the materials that our agents removed from the Tehran nuclear archive that the Iranians never stopped working on a warhead. Unbelievable. And, I can understand the United States wants to pivot to Asia. I understand the United States can coexist with a nuclear threshold capable Iran. And here in the United States and Israel, interests simply don't dovetail. They simply do not. In the United States, the big country is far away from this region. We are a small country. We're in this region and we're threatened with national annihilation. The United States is not. So our interests cannot dovetail. And so we have to reserve our right not to abide by the JCPOA and to take whatever measures that are necessary to defend ourselves for when this agreement creates cover from Iran to make it become a nuclear power. That's period. Did Israel make a mistake? Now, there's a toughie, because you're in diplomacy for enough years, nothing's black and white. I thought our position during the Obama-Netanyahu years was the right position, that we had no choice. It wasn't a consensus. It wasn't an entire consensus among Israeli decision makers or strategic thinkers. There was a school of thought within Israel that thought that we had taken exclusive control or responsibility for the nuclear issue, whereas we should have laid it on the international community. And the current Israeli government has tried to do that, I don't think very successfully. I think the international community wanted the deal. And again, Israeli interests weren't, or even Sunni interests, Saudi and Emirati interests and Bahraini interests. We're not going to stop the international community from doing that. On the other hand, I disagreed with Prime Minister Netanyahu's decision to make that address to the joint session of Congress in opposition of the Obama White House. I thought it would deepen partisanship around the Israel issue, and it did. It cost us, I think, tremendously. The damage is yet to be controlled and rectified in the Democratic Party. And for that, I paid a political price, I must tell you. I don't think the Prime Minister ever forgave me for that. He did not, but I haven't changed my mind to this day. A difficult decision on my part. At the end of the day, Israel has its interests. And Israel has to pursue those interests, especially when they are fateful and existential.
They do. And as a former congressional advisor to a Republican policy advisor and then a Democratic appointee, I applaud you for those efforts. I thought it was way over the line for that to happen. And like you said, there were ramifications. We will go to Guta.
The UN just 3 days ago, the statement on the United Nations Security Council that reaffirmed their commitment in the two-state solutions for Israel-Palestine conflict. And what I'm wondering is, with the situation that is now, what is left from what is being assigned to be Palestine in the first map, what is left to be negotiated? Is it possible to still to exist a Palestine? And if you could say something about also the human rights towards the Palestinian citizens in Israel and in Gaza Strip, please. Thank you.
Okay, so those are several questions. Let me break them down. What's left to be negotiated? Ostensibly, the Palestinians would want to stay along the 67 borders. They'll say that's 22% of Palestine. Whether that includes Gaza or not is not an Israeli issue. It's a Palestinian issue. Hamas and the government of in the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority, which is an Al Fatah government, are at war with each other. So that doesn't seem to be on the. In theory, whenever we discussed a two-state solution with the Obama administration, it always included Gaza, but that was highly theoretical. But then we get to very fundamental questions. What is the ability of the Palestinian people to sustain a state structure? There are thousands of peoples in the world. Not many of them can sustain a state structure. And frankly, as an historian, not as a diplomat, I'm telling you now, I cannot adduce any evidence of the last 100, 120 years that would suggest that the Palestinians are capable of sustaining a state structure. And what's liable to happen is what Israelis fear is going to happen. If you created a Palestinian state, they would fall apart. Just as the Gaza government fell apart within a matter of months after Israel's withdrawal in 2005. We ripped up 21 settlements. I was there as a soldier. It was traumatic for me. I dragged Jews out of their houses in order to advance the peace process. And instead of getting a peace process, we got a Hamas government that fired thousands of rockets at us. Most recently last May, and I watched the rockets falling from the window in the room where I'm talking to you, right behind me. So this is very real for us, and Israelis just simply won't buy it. Certainly a Palestinian state that could ostensibly be responsible for its own security, it can't happen here. No one believes it's going to happen. Zero. Interesting, when I was in politics, this is getting a little bit off the course, but we used to do polling what Israelis care about. So the issue that Israelis overwhelmingly care about is security. But by security, they mean defense against terror and rockets. After that's housing prices. After that, the cost of living. The issue which Israelis care least about, literally 4% of Israelis place this as number one, is the Palestinian issue. Not because they don't, fear for Israel's future as a Jewish and democratic state, but because they just don't feel that there's any solution right now. And the best that we can do is manage it. That's what they feel, because this is not theoretical for us. This is literally our lives. We offered the Palestinians the state in 2001, and we had 1,000 Israeli dead from terrorist attacks, bombing attacks. You know how many Americans that would be? That'd be more Americans than probably America lost in World War II. And it was civilians. So it is. These are very poignant issues for Israelis. They are not theoretical in any way. As for the human rights issues, we are grappling with it every day. Right now, we're dealing with settler violence, and the last time we did against Palestinians, against Israeli peace activists. It is complex. It is, from my perspective, inexcusable if we don't act against this type of violence. Cannot defend it. But people who claim that Israel is an apartheid state because there's two different sets of laws, there's an Israeli law and a Palestinian law, I don't think those people want Israel to impose its law on the Palestinians either. That would be annexation. So again, we find ourselves in a no man's land where creating a Palestinian state could be an existential danger, but not creating a Palestinian state could be an existential danger. I would like to be in that type of dilemma. And the best we can do, and this I do subscribe to, the best we can do is manage it better and to grant the Palestinians the absolute greatest degree of autonomy and to fight against human rights abuses at every possible level.
Thank you very much, Guta and Fariz. We're going to just do two more, and then we're going to let the ambassador go. We will go to Darren.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Good to hear you again, my friend. Yeah, a quick question for you regarding where your thoughts are on this current Biden-Obama administration, the last administration, and then comparing that to the Obama administration.
On Iran, President Obama would often say that America would consider all options, and all options are on the table, including a military option. President Biden has never said that he'll consider a military option, because today, 10, 12 years later, America doesn't have a military option. America is not in a position to project military power anywhere in the world. And I think President Biden made that clear in his remarks about the Ukraine this week. There simply there's not support among the American population for it, Republican and Democratic alike. It's totally nonpartisan, the opposition to further military engagements around the world. That's very significant. But having said that, the Obama administration also said that the JCPOA blocked Iran's path to the bomb. The Biden administration doesn't say that anymore. It says it delays Iran's path to the bomb, which in fact it does. It does delay it for a bit. But from Israel's perspective, at an entirely intolerable cost, not from America's perspective, from Israel's perspective. And I think that the Biden administration is being honest about that it does not block the path to the bomb. So there is a significant difference. But having said that, this administration remains as determined as the Obama administration to achieve that nuclear agreement. And in Israel and throughout much of the Middle East, we are simply scratching our heads. We cannot understand why any country, much less our most important ally, would abandon us in this way. Broadly speaking, the Obama administration came into office with a tremendous effort to reach out to the Middle East, to change the nature of the U.S.-Israel relationship. It had been a special relationship, to sort of more or less normalize that relationship. One specific example was for many, many years, whenever the United States made a major pronouncement on Middle Eastern policy, where the president made a speech of that nature, we would always get a draft of that speech several days at least, if not weeks in advance. President Obama went to Cairo in 2009, gave an hour-and-a-half speech. It was twice as long as the first inaugural address, which changed American foreign policy in fundamental ways to the Middle East, in ways that impacted Israel's security. We had absolutely zero heads up on that, and neither would we have any heads up on any presidential speech about the Middle East over the next 8 years. Zero. That's changing the relationship. The Biden administration, my opinion, is fundamentally different. My closest point of contact in the Obama years was the vice president, and I was extremely fond of him and trusted him. A person who's deeply committed to Israel and its security. I think he loves us, and has a passionate relationship with the Jewish people generally. In that entire administration, there were two individuals who stood out as the people who most were committed to the Israel-U.S. relationship. That was Tony Blinken, who was back then the diplomatic advisor to the vice president, and Jake Sullivan, today the national security advisor, who back then was the head of policy planning in the State Department. But we have to be realistic. The United States, again, has divergent interests, and certainly the Democratic Party has positions which pose challenges to the state of Israel. In the case of Iran, it's an acute challenge. In the case of the Palestinians, it's more of a theoretical challenge. I think the administration understands that there's really no chance to move significantly ahead because the Palestinians don't have a legitimate leadership today. So there it stands. And I think outside of Iran, outside of that Palestinian issue, we will have excellent relationship with this administration.
So, Ambassador, what last thoughts do you want to leave them with when looking at the U.S.-Israeli relationship?
The last I would like to leave with sort of a negative and a positive comment. How's that? The negative comment is, looking back over the last, certainly the last decade, but even before that, 20 years. The United States has made mistake after mistake after mistake in the Middle East. It failed in Iraq. It failed in Syria. It failed in Libya, North Africa. It failed in Egypt. It failed in if I had said Syria yet, it failed in the Palestinian issue. It failed in Yemen. The notion that somehow the United States, with the JCPOA, is making the right decision defies logic and should give people pause after this record of unremitting failures at immense cost, not just to America, but countless thousands of people killed in the Middle East. It should give you cause and say, okay, maybe they're making a mistake here too. Maybe they're wrong. Could it possibly be they've gotten all of this wrong, but they're getting this on Iran right? I think that mandates a serious reconsideration. The positive notion is this: in spite of all of these vicissitudes, all these immense historic challenges to this country has emerged as a country which remains unremittedly democratic, which remains innovative, which has managed to counterbalance tradition with modernity, a nation at arms, which is also democratic. It's managed to blend East and West. These are some of the great challenges facing civilization as a whole. And a country which remains not just fundamentally, sometimes just fiercely pro-American. And you don't find a lot of countries in the world like that. It's not to be taken for granted, I don't think. This is a country where you'll never see an American flag burnt. You never even see the anti-American demonstration. And I think that has a great value. And I think that Americans, even Americans that are very critical of us, and sometimes, I'm very critical of us too, we should take that into consideration. It's worth it.
That is all we have for you today. Again, huge thanks to Ambassador Oren. to our audience for their questions and to you for being here. As a reminder, like all of our episodes, this is an edited version of a much longer conversation that was taped live with real audience questions. For information on how to join us and past episodes, please visit our website, pm101.live. Please also take 2 seconds to subscribe on whichever streaming service you're using right now so you don't miss our next episode this Monday, featuring Congresswoman Sylvia Garcia from Texas, who's a former judge and who served as one of the impeachment managers during President Trump's first impeachment. This has been Politics and Media 101, produced in partnership with Clubhouse. I'm Jeff Browning on behalf of Justin Higgins, our co-founder, and our team. Thank you very much for being here. We hope to see you and hear from you soon.